Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 3 of our stylized cutting board assets, and in this part we're going to be finishing our project by adding our color, our textures, lighting, and rendering. Okay, so first things first, I want to change my project from this matte cap color that we have into the lit version, which is up here in your shading menu if you haven't done that already. And this is just going to allow for our materials to look or behave realistically, and for us to be able to add lighting and the lighting affect those materials. I'm going to start with this cutting board and I'm going to solo it just to have that in my focus. I have my little reference image here to kind of guide me, and then I'm going to hit my paint. I'm also going to create a layer for each of these for paint as well. We do have some layers here for our sculpts, and I'm actually just going to merge those down and by clicking this little button here, and that's just going to kind of merge of all of our layers. And then I'm just going to start fresh with the paint layers, and I'm going to call this one base. And over here in our little shader ball, I'm going to just sample this cutting board. Now obviously this is a reach because I don't think that this is going to read that color perfectly so, but it at least gets us in the ballpark of what we want. Then I'm just going to adjust that to my liking. Right now it's pretty much full gloss, but I'm going to turn that down a bit because I don't want it to be that glossy, but maybe just a little bit glossy. And then I'm going to do something like this. Kind of like that. I'm going to hit paint on. It's just going to flood the entire thing. Also, while we're here, I'm actually going to add a light. I like to always add just a single sunlight while I'm working because I think it just helps get an idea of what this would look like once it's kind of rendered and lit properly. But again, this is just personal preference, so I'm just adding the sunlight, and I'm gonna up the intensity a little bit and make sure it's warm. You could also kind of rotate that around a little bit. I'm gonna bring all of my assets back in just to get some like shadow in there, and then let me make sure that we can like soften. This angle will help you soften those shadows a little bit, so I'm just gonna soften them. And that's pretty much it. Now we'll go back in here, solo that again. And I like to just kind of work on one asset at a time, finish that, and move on to the next one. One of the things I like to do is add a sort of gradient effect. And we don't necessarily have proper gradients here in Nomad, but we can just paint those by hand. So we'll have our sampled base color, and then I'm gonna drag it down into the right a little bit to make it a little bit warm, and using same thing, my paint tool, make sure that I'm on a new layer, and I'm gonna call this one, we'll just call it gradient. And let's see, I also like to change my alpha here to something a lot softer, so I'm gonna scroll way down, probably something like this, almost like an airbrush. You can also just lower the intensity if you like. I'm gonna leave it at full intensity, and I'm just going to shade the bottom of my object very gently. Again, pretty much just painting a gradient by hand. And then of course that still looks very rough, so you can always use your smooth color brush here. I believe it's Dave Reed who has a tutorial on how he did this, but it's pretty much like a soft little blending brush, and all it is really is a smooth brush with the intensity turned all the way down. So I like to use a combination of that and the smudge tool to blend out these gradients. And the smudge tool can be very harsh, so I like to turn the intensity down a bit and just kind of very gently swoop my brush around. And then the other thing you could do is simply turn that layer opacity also, kind of lower that a little bit. And I think that'll give you just like a nice little variation in your color, so it's not just all one shade. Let's see. And then another thing I like to do is just honestly do that again, but with a different shade. Kind of repeat that, but go a little bit more red. And then I'm going to just kind of go over some of these areas a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we're not really going to see the bottom, but I'll shade it anyways. And once again, I'm going to use my smudge tool a bit. And oops, this one's here. So again, just smudge tool it. And probably soften that down as well so it's not so obvious. And I think that adds some nice sort of variance to our colors. The next thing I like to do is, in a new layer, I'm going to add some sort of shading into my creases that we created previously. And in order to do that, I'm going to turn on stroke painting. So you click on the crease tool first, which is a tool we're going to use to kind of dig into these creases, as you can see here. But I want to add color while I do that, so that's why we want to turn stroke painting on, which is this little check mark up here. And again, make sure you're on a new layer. And I think that color we had previously works just fine, so I'm gonna use that. And then I'm just going to start to kind of trace over those creases that we created originally. And this doesn't have to be perfect because we can always soften it using this layer tool as well as the smudge tool. So I'm just trying to kind of get as close as I can to the original shape that we had made. And this is just a nice way to add that kind of, I guess, painted on shadows. It's a really nice effect because you can control the color of your shadowing here to, you know, be a little bit more warm or red, whatever you like, whatever you're going for. But I think it's a really nice trick. Okay, let's do the ones here. And I'm not going to worry about the bottom, like I said, because we're not going to see that. So it's really up to you. I'm going to kind of soften them just a little bit, not too much. I don't want to lose the detail. And then I'm going to use the smooth color brush to just kind of go over it a tiny bit. I might need to bring that strength up a little bit more. Maybe I'll undo that softness. I think it took away too much of the color. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it like that. I'm happy with that. And bring back my tools. You can also paint lighting if you'd like to. It just depends on how stylized you're trying to go. I typically don't, honestly. But let's see. If we were to try to, you would again just kind of create a new layer. And, you know, just hit some of those spots at the top. Like that, maybe. And then bring that opacity down a little bit. Same thing, use your smudge tool. And then kind of push it up a little bit. Also, just kind of lower it a ton because I don't want it to take away the details. So I might move this layer underneath our, how do I move this? There you go. Move our creases above that layer, and that way we don't lose the detail we had added. Okay, so once you're happy with your painting, you can merge your layers down. So that's what I'm going to do for that one. And then we're going to move on to the next one. I'm going to do the cleaver because it seems like a simpler one of the two. And we'll start with our blade here. Same thing, add a layer for that base color. And then for this one, we're going to want probably full metalness on that. And then you could kind of play with the roughness. I find that it being less rough, so kind of like somewhere in the middle, it is a bit more stylized than trying to go for hyper realistic. Unless that's what you're going for, then of course you can feel free to do that. But I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. And then we want to go a bit more cool tone somewhere here in our white and gray area. It's pretty light of a color, so I'm gonna paint on, see what that looks like. And I'm using 3 fingers to rotate my sun around and just kind of the lighting helped me see the color better. I think maybe a little lighter, something like that. Maybe. Things like that might be cute. And then I'm going to add a new layer, and similarly to kind of how I approach everything else, I'll add a bit of gradient to this, and I'll probably go more on this blue side and just start to paint on this. Oh, make sure that you don't have erase clicked, and just kind of paint on this very loosely. And then I'm just going to, once again, let me use my smudge tool this time, and smudge that. I'm also gonna just bring this way down, but I think that adds a bit of a nice effect. I may want to add more to this area over here. Smudge a bit more, and it's looking nice. Okay, and then we're just gonna do our handle now. Same thing, add a new layer, use your paint tool. I'm gonna sample this again, but I'm gonna go more red and darker, of course. Something like that I think looks nice. Paint. And then, as usual, another layer. We're gonna create a sort of gradient, so we're gonna go much darker, and let's maybe a little bit of maybe some of that sort of burgundy-ish color. And then I'm gonna smudge it. And we're going to turn that down a bit. Again, I think that just adds so much more interest here. Oh, I just saw that, so I'm gonna make sure that we pull that back out. Okay, and then I'm gonna merge those layers. I'm probably gonna sample this color here to paint, to paint our little, these knobs. Paint and paint. And maybe make them a bit rougher. I don't think they look super metallic, so let's kind of fix that. Okay, I think something like that might be a little better. Okay. We're gonna go with that. And you can also, on this handle, paint the shadows in to these little holes where the little knots, the little screws are. So I'm gonna sample this again. I'm gonna go darker. Make sure I'm on that new layer, and I'm just going to paint in here. It's kind of hard to see, but we're painting in there and around, and I'm not being perfect at all. Again, I can always use my smudgy tool and sort of soften that up a little bit. And I think that helps. I think that's looking good. And then we can move on to our fish, which our fish is a little bit more complex. So one of the things I realized is we did merge everything, so painting is going to be a little bit difficult. Not too bad. I'll kind of show you guys a trick here. Okay, so for coloring these guys in, thanks to the new update here, we have something called face groups, and Nomad does a pretty good job at creating those groups for you as you're modeling or sculpting. So here, if we click on our selection mask or face groups, I'm gonna use mask because that's what we want. We're gonna sort of mask out the areas we want to paint and work on those individually. So you can see that we have some groups that were created already by default. So while you're in your mask, if you hit face group, it'll show you those groups, and then you could tap them to sort of create a mask around those. So I do kind of want to edit this one because let me clear my mask, because I don't want this blue to go over as it's doing here on this edge here. So let me see if I can paint. I can. So I'm actually gonna, let me undo that. I'm gonna go to mask, and I'm gonna mask out these because those are perfect. I want those two to be the same color. And then back over here in the face groups, I'm going to paint over this. This whole thing could be the same color. We don't want to paint the inside actually, because the inside is going to be a different color. Oh gosh. Okay, well, I would like this all to just stay one color. Okay. So you want to click on patch so that it understands you're just trying to paint the entire thing. Okay, so that would be our outside, and then our inside here, we're gonna just kind of fill it in like that. Make sure that it looks good. Oops. Go back to patch. Okay. All right, perfect. So now we can go back to our mask tool, and I want to work on which one first. Doesn't really matter. We'll work on our inside, and so we'll go back to our paint tool. As you can see, everything else is masked, so it should only be painting this top part. This, I'm afraid it's gonna go over, so I might just come in here and try to mask, yeah, by hand. I don't know if it'll work. Doesn't look like, yeah, kind of. Alright, so we're gonna go on our top view. I'm gonna create a new layer, paint, and I'm going to paint this. That's sort of like salmon pink color. Kind of like that, and then I want it to be a little bit glossy, just a little bit glossy. And I'm just gonna go ahead and paint it. I guess the inside isn't painted, so I'm just gonna erase that. And maybe it needs to be a lot glossier, so let's kind of just take the roughness all the way down, and I'm just going to paint over this. Okay, awesome. It's looking cute. You can even add some texture to this with the clay brush and use one of these alpha mats. Let's see. Let's see. I'm just gonna use something random. Maybe this. It looks kind of gross, but just to add some texture to this. And then again, because it's on a new layer, I can always just soften it up a little bit. But I feel like that adds a little bit more interest to this. Okay, now let's continue. I'm gonna merge that in there. Go back to our mask. We're going to... We painted our inside, so let's do these two. Let me invert solo. So now these are sort of white. So I'll make them more white. And quite frankly, just do this. Just paint them all. Now we actually want this inside part to also be white, so I'm going to just make the brush smaller and paint in there. Okay, and that's that. Back to mask. I'm gonna clear it so we could kind of see what we have. I think that looks good, and then we'll go back to our mask and select the outside. Tap again to invert the mask. Go back to my paint. I'm gonna merge that layer down, create a new layer. And this will be the color of the fish body. So I'm gonna sample that, but make it way brighter. I want it to be a little bit more on the green side, so I'm gonna go down. You can of course paint this however you wish. I'm going to make it extra shiny and wet. And then I'm just going to paint the entire thing. Like so. And then similarly to our sort of fish meat here, the salmon, we can add some sort of texture to this guy. And we could use the same one, or quite frankly anything with some sort of kind of bumpy texture. And this is gonna look crazy, but I'm going to soften it with the smooth tool, but also with my brush, with my layer opacity here. Clear the mask and see how this is looking. I think it's looking a little bit too extreme over here. Just like a tiny bit. Won't hurt. Okay. We'll keep that. I think that looks kind of cool. Then we basically repeat that process to this guy. I actually am looking at this picture, and I think this white part here on the border should maybe be more warm toned and more yellow. So I'm gonna go back to my mask selection tool, and I'm gonna grab those two, and I'm gonna hit invert, and we'll go back to paint, and I want that to be more on the yellow side, something like that. So we'll just do that. And then I'm going to kind of grab that one as well and repaint the inside. Okay, I think that looks cuter. Okay, I need to clear my mask. Okay, there we go. And of course, we can add our gradient effect to our fish as well. I think that would be nice. I'm gonna make it like a dark teal in a new layer, and I'm not even gonna bother masking for this. Make sure that I have my sort of airbrush, and we're gonna kind of just do the bottom like that, letting it go over the edges a little bit. Oops. Okay. So you actually want to make sure that in your settings here, under filter, you have your front facing vertices only checked on, and that will make it so that this won't happen. So when you're painting a top or a bottom face, it's only going to affect that face that is basically facing the camera, where in this case, when I painted the bottom, it also affected the top. But that's okay. I'm just going to erase it. But I'm erasing, making sure that setting is clicked on. Otherwise, it would erase the bottom as well. So just keep that in mind. But going back to this layer, we will smudge it. Oops, a little bit too strong there. I'm gonna try the smooth color maybe. It's a little bit less intense than the smudge tool. I think that looks good. I'm happy with that shading, so I'm just gonna merge it down. And then finally, we will move on to our big fish. Okay, so for our big fish, we're just going to follow the same exact sort of formula, if you will. I'm going to sample this color here. Oops. Paint tool selected. I'm gonna just long press with my finger to grab that green color. Then I'm gonna solo my fish. We have a new, okay, well this is a sculpting layer, so I'm just gonna merge that down. And I'm gonna actually take a look at the face groups first to see what that looks like. And then looking at our reference picture, I can see that the fins will be a different color, of course. So let's see if we can fix those. Here, I'm gonna go into the patch. I think it's this one, yeah, okay. And then I'm just gonna join these as best as I can here. Oops, I'm gonna bring this down a bit. Oh gosh, it keeps on kind of like that. I want to say we click, no, okay. I'm gonna hit this relax tool here and brush over my edges, and that will help me have a bit of a smoother transition here. Definitely need to clean that up, so I'm gonna grab, is it this color? No, it is this one. And I'm gonna bring that down a bit and just kind of clean that up. Excuse me. Okay. We'll come back again. Wrong one. And then we're gonna relax. And then if for some reason you don't have the update and you don't have to, you know, use face groups, you can just use mask traditionally to help you paint these areas. Best practice definitely maybe would have been to just not merge these yet, since we're gonna paint them different colors, and just kind of left them without merging. But it's not a big deal. You can always also just paint. I mean, again, this wasn't in the update, and I typically didn't even use mask when I was painting. I would just kind of paint. I would honestly just paint and smooth out my edges and just kind of blend things out, and not really a big deal. Okay, so that works for me. And then we can, let's see, these two are fine, but this one here needs to be a different color. think this one here and that one. And then this guy here is not the same color. This is a little bit. Okay. So I'm just going to fix that edge there. And then we can start painting. Okay, I messed that one up. That's okay. This one here. Okay, and then I'm just gonna relax those edges a bit. Relax these in here as well, and these in here. Okay, awesome. So once you've done that, we can go back to our mask. Really doesn't matter which one you use, because I'm just using my finger to tap anyway. So I'm just going to tap our body, tap outside to invert, go back to paint tool, create a new layer, and then using that color here, I'm going to hit paint on. Oops, I didn't mean to up the roughness. Let's sample this again here. Paint on. There you go. Okay, and then I'm going to sample this color here, our little meat. Doesn't sound very appealing. Okay, mask tool, clear the mask. I'm going to select our inside, invert, paint tool. I'm just gonna merge that one. I'm gonna add a layer, and as we can see, our little fin and this one are on the same group. It doesn't really matter because they're not next to each other, so I can paint here without affecting that. So I'm just gonna paint that, and then I'm gonna add our texture again. So we'll try this brush tool. I don't think that's the same one I used, but I also don't think it'll matter that much because it's such a subtle little texture that it's just not, you won't be able to tell much of the difference. So I think that's fine. And then I'm just gonna honestly merge all those down. Okay, back to our mask, clear the mask. I'm gonna paint out here, invert, paint, add a new layer. And let me sample this color here that we used earlier. And then in here, what was this? This is the new one we added. We're going to just paint it like so. Make sure we got the edges, the borders here as well. Okay, clear our mask, go back to paint, just kind of look at what that's looking like. Looking good. Okay, back to mask. Let me merge my layers. And then I'm going to select my little fins. Now all of these are actually the same color, so that's good. We're gonna add a layer, paint, and this one is it's very bright green. And I don't know what looked good here. Let's see. I'm gonna try this color and see if I like it. Now I could hit paint all and it should only paint my, unmasked areas, but I can't do that right now because we have our fish insides showing up. So another thing is I should probably still have my front facing vertex only selected, so that's why I'm missing some of these areas when I do this. So sometimes it's useful to have it on, sometimes it's you want it off, but in this case it helps to have it turned off. Okay, so back to masks. I can clear it and see the colors working together properly. I kind of like that. I think that looks cute. So I'm gonna keep that green. And as you can see here, some of the edges you may be okay with or not. But you can use the smooth color to kind of blend those, soften those edges if you'd like. I don't mind them too much. I don't think it's a bad seam. I think it could be worse. But I'm just gonna soften them a little bit. Like that. All right, and then I'm gonna just merge that down. I'm gonna add a new layer and we're gonna do our gradient. I'm gonna kind of see if I could sample it. Don't think I can. It's too light. That's okay. We'll just kind of sample this guy again and go down to like a teal color like that. And then make sure it's on a new layer. And I'm just going to, and this one I will remember to check front facing only. And then we're just gonna kind of go over the bottom. It looks like a little ceramic fish, which is really cute actually. Okay. And then I'm going to smudge like so. Kind of push it to blend it around a little bit. And push down to, it's getting too close to the front. We don't want that. I also don't want it on top here, so I'm gonna just kind of do that. I'm gonna bring my smooth color in, and let's see. Pushing it, still pushing that teal color. And then I'm gonna soften that layer a little bit. You can use the crease tool like we did with our cutting board to maybe add some more depth to these, some more details to this fish. So like in here, for example. And then I'm gonna soften them a little because I don't want it to be that dramatic. I think that's good. And you can get really like in depth, like do this border around here as well with obviously not that color, just like a different color. It's up to you. I think I'm not going to do all of that. I'm going to maybe paint this inside here a little bit. Oops, I wanted to be on a new layer. Just very gently to just kind of fake a shadow in there that I'm not, having right now. Soften that, merge it in. Another thing you could do is add detail underneath these fins. Or gills. I think gills is the right word. So again, same thing, just kind of go underneath with the crease tool a little bit. I think that's really nice, and then soften that. Same thing here. And I think that adds a really nice effect to that. Let's actually do these in the back while we're at it. Move our light around. and bring that down. And then I'm gonna just merge down. So, so I typically don't use Nomad to, light and render my scenes, but for those of you who, are wanting to do this fully here, I'm gonna just kind of go over a very basic setup for you guys. So with our lighting, you can use the sunlight if you'd like. A lot of times I do. I just like that sort of warm lighting, and you can just keep that if you'd like. Let me lower that a little bit, maybe soften the shadows. And then, in addition to that, you could create a sort of a spotlight here. If you long press that sun, then you could choose spotlight. Now, as you can see, my lights disappear, and that's because you might have light icons turned on and off. I'm going to grab that spotlight I just created, and I'm going to up the intensity here. And I'm going to mess with the cone angle here and see what we're looking like. Obviously, that's way too intense. Let me turn the intensity down a little bit. And you can also bring the size up. I think that's a really nice sort of soft effect. Now here, I'm not following any sort of rules. Ideally, you'd want like a 3-point lighting system where, you have your key light, your fill light, and your rim light that's coming from the back. And so that's just honestly what you should probably be following. I'm going to clone this light, and then I'll go ahead and create that sort of rim light, which will be back here. And I'm going to bring it down. I'm also going to turn off my other lights just so that I could see what that light is doing. I'm also going to turn the environment off, and that'll really help you figure out what each light is doing. So again, I want a rim light, and that's what this will do. And I'm going to soften the shadows. And play with my intensity. And you can also change the sort of color of that light if you want to do something maybe a little different, a little cool toned. I'm going to keep it in this sort of warm area. And then I'm going to slowly turn each other light on. So I'm going to bring in this light. I'm going to also rename this so that I don't get confused. So this is my rim light. This will be my key light. So I'm going to rename that key. And let's see where that one's at. Honestly, that one's more of a fill light, so I'm going to call that fill light, and all that means it's going to be filling in any dark shadows very softly, but it's not my main light source. So maybe turn the intensity down a little, and then let's bring in our sun again, which is definitely our key light because it's our main source of light. We're going to intensify it a little bit. And then you can turn your environment back on if you'd like, or you could leave it off. What I'm going to do is just turn the exposure on it down by a lot. So that way it's just kind of there, but not taking over our scene. And then what you could do now is you can go into your post-processing and make sure you turn it on. Now, depending on your iPad model and, all the specs and all that, you'll have different capabilities here. I like to bring this all the way up to just get the best quality I can. I keep it at full resolution as well. I don't really mess with this here. I want to make sure my reflections are on. Make sure global illumination is on as well, and I typically keep it around 5. And then also make sure ambient occlusion is on so that you could get those really nice shadows. And then you could also play with this and see what you like. And this is going to, again, give you those really nice shadows. And then you can turn on depth of field too if you want that sort of effect. And whatever object you click on is going to become the focus object, and then the depth of field will adjust to that. So that's pretty nice. And then you can edit how much blur you want. Let me see. That'll look a little bit interesting. And then you have other settings here, which quite frankly I don't typically use a whole lot of. You can turn curvature on and you could get some really cool sort of stylized effect. So the bump color, let's say we made it something more warm. I'm going to turn the cavity off for now so that you guys could see what this does. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you can see, it adds a bit of kind of white brimming around your crevices, or I guess not crevices, but all the ridges, all the borders of your objects. So that's a cool way to create that sort of stylized effect to your textures. And the cavity does the opposite, and it will affect the crevices. But yeah, you could use that if you'd like. I think I'll leave it on. And then instead of black, I might do like a brown. Something like that. Might turn this down a little bit. Both of them. Okay. And you can turn on your vignette if you'd like. I believe these two are on by default here. But that's all I do to my render settings, and then you'll go up here into your little folder and you will hit render, export to whatever size you'd like. Let's see, we'll do square, and I'm just gonna hit export. Let me see. There you go. It gives you a warning to save, so I'm gonna save this because clearly I haven't saved, but see, that looks really cool in the little preview. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and export this. Okay, so it looks like we crashed, but that's okay. If that happens, you probably just want to adjust your settings a little bit to work for you. You might just need to render at a smaller, let's see. Let me try that. There you go. See, so typically when it's rendering, you'll see this kind of, and it's going up to 1000 samples. But yeah, that is honestly pretty much it for sculpting, for my personal sculpting process here in Nomad. As mentioned earlier, I don't typically render in Nomad. I just like the way that Redshift handles, you know, my materials and my lighting better, but I am excited for the future of Nomad. We have some wonderful devs who do a lot of work in continuing to update and add more features to this application, so I'm definitely very grateful for that, and I hope this tutorial was useful for you guys. If you guys have any questions or suggestions, leave them down below. Again, as always, thank you so much for watching and supporting, and I will see you guys on the next video.